Hey everyone, and welcome back to Den Mall Walking. Today we're at London's Battersea Power Station. This iconic building has been featured in Alfred Hitchcock's Sabotage, Monty Python's Meaning of Life, and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. It's perhaps best known, at least in popular culture, for appearing on the cover of Pink Floyd's album Animals. At its peak, Battersea produced 20% of London's power. It's now, as of October 2022, a shopping mall. But why? How? Is it as nice as it looked in pictures? I want to find out, so I grabbed my camera and hopped on the northern line of the London Underground. Which, in fact, I was able to do thanks to redevelopment of this site. Opened in 2021, the part funding of Battersea Power Station, there's a mouthful, was a requirement of this project. In 1975, A station at Battersea was closed permanently. 8 years later, in 1983, B station also closed. But there was a big problem. In 1980, this building had been granted Grade 2 listed status, which meant that it couldn't be demolished or have its exterior significantly altered. A plan to turn the power station into a theme park was approved in 1986, but later halted in 1989 due to a lack of funding. Yep. We really might have missed out on a Tower of Terror-esque attraction in one of those iconic chimneys. Oh, what might have been. Despite plans for offices, shops, and a hotel being approved in 1990, the station would be left to rot for more than 3 decades until the site reopened in its current state in 2022 by a conglomerate from Malaysia that includes a massive pensions fund, which means there are a lot of older Malaysians who are hoping that this place is a massive success. Dog in the mall sighted. Repeat, we have a dog in the mall. Whatever else I might say about this place, and I have a lot to say about it, I do think it's seriously pretty. I've seen it described as dank and soulless, but I can't agree with that. The architecture is a blend of old and new, with a big old pinch of brutalism that I'm a massive fan of. The Grade 2 status of the building means that there are all sorts of limitations around what developers and architects could do with the outside. But they've really gone to town modernising the interior in a way that's minimal and pays homage to its industrial heritage. And the end result is pretty impressive. Now, time for a quick musical interlude. Almost daily, I see people on Reddit ask why dead and abandoned shopping malls can't be repurposed as residences for the homeless or the elderly. The answer to that is pretty straightforward. The infrastructure is all wrong. Many units don't have their own gas or water supplies, and the buildings generally aren't insulated well. With their glassy skylights, most malls would be hotter than a greenhouse in the summer and ice cold in the winter. Malls just aren't suited to overnight occupation without extensive climate control, and that's expensive. Which brings me to the other answer why no one is in a hurry to house the elderly or homeless in dying malls. There's no money in it. We live in a time where malls are closing left, right and centre, either being demolished entirely or converted into something else. But Battersea Power Station is a rare example of things going in the other direction. An existing structure being converted into a mall. Walking around Battersea Power Station, you hear a lot of the following: "Gosh, it really is big in here," and "They did a lovely job of this place," and variations thereof. What I didn't see a lot of was people with bags. As its second birthday approaches, I get the impression that a lot of people who visit this mall are still doing so to gawk at its interior rather than shop. Then again, that may not be a huge problem for many of the upscale brands in here. Companies like Arc'teryx, Omega, Apple, and Breitling may only need to make a few sales per day here to justify a presence. And for companies like Polestar Automobiles, I get the impression that leasing a unit may be as much about raising brand awareness as it is making sales. After all, who goes to the mall and leaves with a new car? Maybe more people than I'd think. One of the coolest things in here is the control room B bar, which is apparently also an escape room now, that's converted from the old control room of the power station, making use of original control panels, levers and switches. It's all very Thunderbirds, or to give a reference less British and from this century, like something out of the Bioshock video games. Elsewhere in the complex, the food and drink options are pure hipster, or whatever the modern way of describing something as hipster is. Basic, maybe? I'm getting old, folks. Blank Street Coffee, Crosstown Donuts, Dishoom, Gordon Ramsay's Street Pizza, and similar. The odd man out is perhaps the inclusion of a cheeky Nando's. And that sort of speaks to the spirit of the complex as a whole. If this place doesn't quite feel like a typical mall, that's because it isn't one. Like Warehouse Row in Chattanooga, Tennessee, somewhere I'll have a video on soon, this is less about shopping than it is creating a carefully curated experience designed to appeal to a wealthy clientele with a lot of leisure time. And if you find yourself struggling to leave it all behind, I have good news. You don't have to. As part of the site's £9 billion redevelopment, more than 4,000 homes in and around the power station were built. Originally retailing for £800,000, a flat in here, or an apartment for our American friends, might now cost you as much as anywhere from £8 to £30 million, or around $10 to $40 million. And through a delightful quirk of how council tax is calculated in this country, residents here pay lower monthly rates than a typical household in Blackpool, Stoke-on-Trent, or Nottingham. Oh, capitalism. Back at it again. The aim here is to keep people hanging around for as long as possible. Long enough that they eventually feel a capitalist itch that only dropping a couple of thousand on some Apple products or a Madewell haul can scratch. Malls like this one offer the closest thing many of us have to a third space, somewhere that isn't home or work. I'm planning a video on malls and third spaces sometime in the future. They offer the upper middle classes the same thing that the greasy food courts and conversation pits of suburban malls did to American teenagers in the 80s and 90s. Albeit with much more ambitious financial aims. But there's a bit of a dark edge to all this. Historically, Battersea and Nine Elms wasn't exactly the greatest area. Not exactly unsafe, but pretty much desolate and devoid of infrastructure. In recent years, it's been transformed into what the Guardian newspaper called a playground for the super rich, with, quote, every square inch monetized. It reminds me in some ways of the Coal Drops Yard development near King's Cross Station. Prices here are designed to freeze out anyone with less than $1 million to spend on their home, with the affordable housing component built off-site right next to the railway tracks. It represents just 9% of the development, way below the 50% figure that was legally mandated at the time of construction. Empty units are kept pretty well hidden. And, of course, there's plenty of private security around to sweep away any undesirables who so much as think about congregating in the area. All of which sets kind of a dangerous precedent for London, in which the gap between the haves and the have-nots continues to widen. But who's worried about that when you can't see the have-nots, right? Okay, that's enough politics for one video. Maybe it's just on my mind because I'm scripting this voiceover on the day of the UK's general election. In one way, converting a Grade 2 listed landmark into a shopping mall feels a bit like when UK pub brand Wetherspoons snaps up a historic Art Deco cinema to sell cheap pints and fish and chips in it. Only on a much larger scale. There's a sense that the structure's original purpose is being betrayed for something less noble, but, on the other hand, you wonder what would have happened to it if it hadn't been bought for redevelopment. Would it just sit empty and rot? Would it be knocked down altogether? And which of these three options is worse? When I first heard about Battersea Power Station's transformation, I was reminded of Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, observing that your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. After visiting, however, I have to acknowledge that they made a pretty nice job of the conversion. Almost 2 years on, this place isn't exactly new anymore. I wanted to give it a little time to settle before I visited, but I'm still not exactly sure what the future holds for this place. Its developers have deep pockets to prop it up though, so I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. But I also wonder if the average Brit, even the average Londoner, knows that this place exists. I have to confess that I didn't for about a year after it opened, and even though you wouldn't call this a dead mall, I'm the type of person you would expect to. A long-awaited Pink Floyd reunion concert couldn't hurt when it comes to raising awareness, but maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. Regardless of whether or not you can actually afford to do much shopping here, I do recommend swinging by Battersea Power Station. Even if it's only to say, gosh, it really is big in here, or they did a lovely job of this place. I'd like to thank you all for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe. It really does help out. As always, my Instagram and some ways to support the channel are linked below. Until we meet again, it's time to power down. Goodbye from Battersea Power Station.